forest is quiet in a way that feels wrong, not peaceful, not calm, but watchful, as if every tree is holding its breath. And it is in that silence that true fear begins, because isolation is not simply the absence of people. It is the slow erasure of everything that makes you human. And this is where our story begins, not with a scream, but with a realization. The moment someone understands they are truly alone, miles from civilization, no signal, no familiar sound, no certainty that another human being will ever see them again. And before we go any further, welcome to Mr. Whisper's Official, a channel dedicated to real stories, unsettling truths, and the quiet horrors that follow people long after the screaming stops. So if you're drawn to the shadows of reality, consider subscribing, because these stories are not meant to be told once. They linger. And tonight we're exploring survival stories where being lost wasn't just a physical condition, it was a psychological descent, beginning with a man who set out on what should have been a routine hike, a marked trail, a weekend escape, nothing more. But somewhere between confidence and complacency, he stepped off the path, just for a moment, just to explore. And when he turned back, the trail was gone, replaced by endless repetition, trees that looked the same, rocks that felt familiar but weren't. And as daylight began to thin, panic crept in quietly, because the human mind is not designed to exist without reference points. And when those vanish, something ancient wakes up, a primal awareness that whispers you are prey. And that night, as he built a small fire and listened to the woods breathe around him, he noticed something disturbing. The sounds weren't random. They felt paced, deliberate, branches snapping at irregular intervals, never close enough to confirm, never far enough to dismiss. And as hunger dulled his thoughts and dehydration tightened his focus, his mind began to fill the silence with meaning, because the brain would rather invent a threat than accept the void. And this is the first unseen horror of the wild. Not a creature, not a monster, but the realization that isolation strips away logic, leaving instinct in control. And once instinct takes over, fear doesn't shout, it whispers. And those whispers grow louder the longer no one answers back. By the second day, survival is no longer about direction, it's about endurance. And this is when the wilderness begins to change shape, not physically, but psychologically, because exhaustion bends perception, and hunger distorts memory, and the man began to notice patterns where none should exist. Paths that appeared and disappeared, shadows that lingered too long, and sounds that repeated themselves with unsettling familiarity, like footsteps that stopped when he stopped. And this is where many lost survivors report the same phenomenon, the sensation of being observed, not seen, not hunted, just watched. And the terrifying part is that there is no proof, only the certainty that something is wrong. And as the heat of the day drained him and the cold of night crept into his bones, his thoughts turned inward, looping, replaying mistakes, amplifying guilt. And in that mental spiral, the wilderness became a presence, not hostile in a dramatic way, but indifferent, vast, uncaring. And that indifference is more terrifying than aggression, because it suggests you don't matter enough to be attacked. And when hallucinations began, subtle at first, a voice carried by the wind, his name whispered just beyond the firelight, he knew something inside him was breaking. And survival experts will tell you that the brain, under extreme stress, will create companionship to avoid psychological collapse. But knowing that doesn't make it less horrifying when it happens. Because even when you understand it's not real, your body reacts as if it is. Heart racing, muscles tensing, eyes scanning the darkness for something you cannot name. And in many true survival accounts, this is the turning point, when people stop trying to escape the wilderness and start negotiating with it, apologizing to the trees, promising to leave, promising to be better. Because when isolation reaches a critical point, reason gives way to ritual, and fear becomes something you speak to in the dark. Another story, another landscape, different terrain, same descent. This time a solo camper in a mountainous region, experienced, prepared, confident, until weather turned without warning, skies collapsing into a sudden blizzard that erased tracks and landmarks in minutes. And this is where nature shifts from environment to adversary, because unpredictability is its sharpest weapon. And as temperatures plummeted and visibility vanished, every decision became a gamble: stay put and freeze, or move and risk injury. And in these moments, survivors often describe a feeling of being tested, as if the land itself is watching to see what choice you'll make. And as night fell, the wind howled through the terrain in long, human-like tones, carrying sound in unnatural ways, making distance impossible to judge. And when the camper heard what sounded like movement circling the shelter, slow, deliberate, methodical, fear spiked, not because of what it might be, but because of what it represented: the loss of control. And later, long after rescue, he would admit that what terrified him most wasn't the cold or the animals. It was the moment he realized nature doesn't need intent to destroy you. It doesn't need malice. It simply exists. And if you're in the wrong place at the wrong time, you are erased without ceremony. And that understanding leaves a scar, because it reframes the world, turning beauty into something fragile, something deceptive. And many survivors say that after experiencing this shift, they never truly feel comfortable outdoors again, because once you've seen nature as an antagonist, you can't unsee it. At the edge of survival, when the body is failing and the mind is fraying, people do things they never imagined themselves capable of, not out of courage, but necessity. And this is where the most unsettling survival stories live. In the quiet decisions made when no one is watching, when morality becomes flexible and survival becomes the only rule. And some survivors speak of moments where they felt detached from themselves, watching their own actions as if from a distance, conserving energy by suppressing emotion, rationing thoughts the way they ration food. And in these states, fear evolves. It becomes calm, focused, efficient, and that calm is dangerous, because it makes the idea of giving up feel reasonable, even logical. And many report a moment of surrender, lying down, ready to sleep, ready to let the wilderness take them, only to be pulled back by something small, a memory, a sound, a promise they made to themselves. And in psychological studies, this is referred to as the survival threshold, the point where the will to live either reignites or extinguishes. And those who survive often describe it not as strength, but stubbornness, an irrational refusal to disappear. And when rescue finally comes, it feels unreal, intrusive, like being pulled from a dream you weren't finished with, because by then, the wilderness has already changed you. Surviving the wild does not end when you return to civilization, because the wilderness follows you back, in quieter ways, in sleepless nights, in the discomfort of silence, in the way open spaces now feel threatening instead of freeing. And many survivors admit they struggle to explain their experience, because the true horror wasn't what happened, it was what it did to their mind. The way isolation peeled back layers of identity, revealing something raw and unfamiliar beneath. And modern survival psychology continues to study these effects, not just to help people survive longer, but to understand what prolonged isolation reveals about human consciousness. And as technology advances and exploration pushes further into remote places, these stories matter more than ever, because they remind us that the wild is not evil, but it is honest, and honesty can be terrifying. And as you reflect on these stories, ask yourself this: if you were stripped of comfort, connection, and certainty, left alone with only your thoughts and the endless silence of the wild, what would answer you back? And if this story stayed with you, if it made you uncomfortable, if it lingered longer than you expected, then you already understand why these stories are told. So if you want to continue exploring the darker edges of reality, subscribe to Mr. Whisper's Official, because some places are not meant to be found, and some stories are only whispered.